thanks, Dr. Nerina, for joining me today on my show. It's a real privilege just to have you here, and your expertise and knowledge is absolutely vital. And really, really keen to share this with the other viewers and readers. So, without further ado, I just wanted to do a quick introduction and then we'll go straight into it, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
So, Dr. Nerina Ramlakhan has worked as a physiologist and sleep expert for 25 years. She spent a decade conducting sleep and wellness programs at the Capio Nightingale Hospital in London, coaches on burnout prevention at Ashridge Business School, and is the original founder of BUPA's Corporate Wellbeing Solutions. Nerina works with individuals as well as numerous corporate clients from various industries, including in sports such as the Chelsea Football Club, and hosts a regular sleep program at Vale de Moses Yoga Retreat in Portugal. Nerina is the author of Tired But Wired, Fast Asleep, Wide Awake, and The Little Book of Sleep, The Art of Natural Sleep. Her work has been featured in The Times, The Telegraph, The Guardian, New Scientist, Psychologies, Red, and Healthy Living magazines, and she has appeared on numerous national TV and radio programs, including This Morning, Jamie and Jimmy's Friday Night Feast, Sky News, and BBC Radio 2. Nerina is also a stylist editorial contributor and gives her expert opinion for the Stylist Sleep Diaries, an ongoing weekly feature where readers can record their routines and receive her expert advice on their lifestyle and bedtime routines. Her new book is Finding Inner Safety. So, Nerina, without further ado, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Shashati. It's a real privilege to be here today. And thank you for that lovely introduction. You managed to get everything in there.
There's so much to pack in, there's just so much you've done in these 25 years that it really, really required every single bit to be featured, I believe.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here
So,
today, and
Nerina,
especially.
first of all,
Sorry,
yeah,
Shashati.
I
I think there's a
apologize. There's
real
a
delay
small
on this.
delay, I think, between our dialogue.
Yes. Why don't I wait for your question then? I'll do that.
Okay, I will do that. I'm going to be very slow and then hopefully this will work. So, the first question is, so what made you feel that this was the right time to write this particular book?
So I really started incubating the idea for this book over 20 years ago, finding inner safety. So if I can just do a little, because I love the cover of this book. There's lots of pictures of nature and trees and birds and things. So it was over 20 years ago that the idea started to incubate, arose in my mind and my consciousness. But the world wasn't ready for it. I was helping people to sleep, but I started to notice that I kept saying this one sentence to people over and over again. And every time I used the sentence, people would take notice. And that was, we sleep when we feel safe. We sleep when we feel safe. And often people would stop and they would write it down. And I thought, there's something there about feeling safe that's really relevant. But I think the world wasn't ready for it. And my publishers, certainly, I started gaining a reputation for being a sleep expert. And so publishers came along to me and said, we want you to write a book. And I'd say, I want to write a book about feeling safe. And they would say, well, no, we really want a book about sleep. And it was, so I ended up writing 3 books about sleep. And each book took me closer to introducing the notion of finding inner safety. But it was just before the pandemic that one particular publisher, one of the biggest publishing houses in the world, approached me and said, what are you writing? And I said, I'm writing this book about safety. And this was 2 weeks before we went into the first lockdown. And they said, you're writing a book about safety. I don't think people will know what that means. And then we went into the pandemic. And then, of course, everyone was talking about not feeling safe. And so along came my publishers, um, Wiley, Capthorne, and they said, yeah, we want that book. And the world was ready for it. So everything has a divine timing, I believe. And so I wrote it during the pandemic. And finally, the world was ready. And I have to say, on a personal level, maybe I have always been fascinated, or at least in the last 2.5 decades, fascinated by the notion of finding inner safety because of my own personal challenges to find safety within myself.
Yeah, 100%. I really sort of connected with that because I have the same sort of situation where finding inner safety was a real big issue. I had so many sleep problems growing up as a result of trying to find a safe space. So I could totally relate to what you were saying. And it's really strange because I have so many kind of neuropathic and neurological conditions, including genetic ones. So it's really interesting reading about it. So why do you think there's still like very little research in regards to the connection of the nervous system and inner safety?
Yeah. So, surprisingly, Shashti, there's actually a lot of research, but it's just not out there in the public domain. So, when I was at university, I'm trying not to give my age away today, but the fact that I've been doing this work for 25 years might give you some ideas. And the fact that I was at university in the 90s and studying for my degree in physiology and then going on to do do my doctorate, my PhD in physiology. But even then, going to lectures in physiology and lectures on sleep, no one talked about safety science. But way back then, Professor Dr. Stephen Porges was doing research on polyvagal theory, and people like Peter Levine was talking about trauma. So there were people who were talking about it, and there was research going on, but it wasn't accessible to the public. And so what I did with finding inner safety was what I was setting out to do was to write a book that was accessible to the public, accessible to the man, the woman on the street. Because if you look at safety research and you look at polyvagal theory, it's quite complex. I mean, Stephen Porges' work is amazing. I've kissed his book. When I found out about it, which was just before the pandemic, I was so relieved to find this book because finally here was research for things that I had been intuiting, I'd been feeling, and finally here was the research. But it was complicated, and even the therapist Debs Dana, who went on and wrote a book for therapists. Um, yeah, her book is accessible to clinicians, but not so much to the man in the street. Interestingly, since I published my book, I think just before I had my book published in April of this year, her book came out. I can't remember, it's called Anchoring or Anchorage, and she talks
Right.
about roots and things like that, which, it's interesting because we were on the same path. So the research was there, but it wasn't available for everyone.
That's amazing. So, and as you mentioned, the polyvagal theory, which is, could you probably explain a little about the polyvagal theory and why it's important for our average layman out there?
Yeah. So our ability to feel safe, our ability to tap into inner safety is related to how our nervous system is responding to the world. And the nervous system is designed along the premise of, am I safe or am I not safe? Safe or not safe? It's almost as simple as that. And if you look at the history of evolution of the nervous system, the evolutionary timeline that Stephen Porges first started to talk about when he introduced the notion of polyvagal theory. He started off on our evolutionary timeline where we were more reptilian, if you like, and we had a freeze response in order to survive lack of safety in the external world. We would freeze and we would numb and play dead. And then when we started to develop the resource to fight external threat, another branch of the nervous system developed, which enabled us to fight. So we had the freeze response, the reptilian response, which evolved. The nervous system then evolved. And if you went into the more complex science of it, you would see that nerve fibers were being myelinated, the nerve fibers became more sophisticated, more developed, and we developed the fight response, as we classically know it as the fight or flight. And then, as we became more evolved, we developed the ability to, and more resourceful, the ability to protect ourselves, to build safe shelter, to hunt for our food, to find safety, and to thrive. So the nervous system has evolved hierarchically along these premises of Can I fight threats? Can I not? And am I really safe? So the nervous system, the autonomic, is divided into three branches, if you like. So on one bit of the nervous system, you have the fight or flight, the sympathetic nervous system, and the other bit, you have the parasympathetic. But the parasympathetic is divided itself into two branches, and you have dorsal vagus, which is the reptilian. So that's numb, frozen, shut down, the
Mhm.
dorsal vagus. And then the main part of the parasympathetic is ventral vagus, which is about I am safe, I can digest my food, my immunity is working, I can sleep at night, I have sexual function. But the other two, sympathetic nervous system is I need to fight or flight, and the dorsal vagus is about I need to shut down. So every time we respond to the world, we're making a judgment. And there's another label in safety science and polyvagal science called neuroception. How am I feeling the world right now? Does this feel safe or unsafe? And if I feel I can fight the threat, I might go into my sympathetic nervous system. But if I feel I have no control, I go into dorsal vagus. But if I feel like I'm thriving and I feel that all is well in my world, then I'm in my parasympathetic ventral vagus and I can sleep and my immune function works well and I can digest food. So our health, our well-being, our quality of life depends on where we are living in the nervous system. And that is a 5-minute overview of polyvagal theory.
That's amazing. Um, I'm just quickly checking. Yes, yeah. Sorry, you froze for a second, but yes, I absolutely. It is such an amazing science behind it, and it really does explain so much. So, do you think changing our neural activity can actually enhance our psychological well-being?
I think doing the things that send messages to the nervous system, you are safe, you are safe, which is what finding inner safety is about, because I share a lot of resources and tools. So making the choices, doing the things that enable us to calm the nervous system um, when the world is safe will help to embed that into the nervous system, and doing things that enable us to recover from anything that poses a bit of a demand, anything that places demand on the nervous system. So that, for example, I'm doing this interview with you. Psychologically, I feel really safe. Let me see what my nervous system is doing. Okay, my heart rate is in the 70s right now. On some level, my nervous system is registering that I need to expend energy to cope with this demand. And I know that because my resting heart rate last night during the night was 47. I'm very fit, so my pulse rate is low. In my waking hours, as I go about my day, my pulse rate oscillates between the 50s and 60s. But at the moment, my heart registers there's more demand. And so, even though I psychologically don't feel unsafe, my body is registering this as a little bit of challenge to my body. And my adrenals are producing a bit of adrenaline to enable me to deal with this challenge. Now, if I went from this into a presentation on stage or on live television and having drunk 5 cups of coffee after this session, and then I try to get there and there's a tube strike, and then I try and get an Uber and then the Uber doesn't work, and then I turn up to the studio and I'm late because of the traffic, because everyone's driving because of the tube strike, and then my teenager phones me on the way, and she says blah blah blah. She's had an argument with whatever because somebody did this on TikTok, and then I get a call from my brother that my elderly mother who has dementia in South America is doing this and the other. Can you see how after my heart rate goes up, my adrenaline goes up, my sympathetic nervous system becomes activated? I have a perception that my world is unsafe. Do you see, hopefully none of these things are going to happen and I'm not going to be on live TV and I'm definitely not drinking lots of coffee after this. But you can see how our external world can constantly send demands and place onslaught on our nervous system so that our neural activity starts to behave as if we're under threat from a saber-toothed tiger. So we have to constantly resource ourselves. to live in the ventral vagus when we don't need to be in sympathetic activity, or we don't need to shut down in the face of threat. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's fascinating, isn't it? And you mentioned this, and it's such a big problem now. Even just now, when you mentioned, your daughter might get upset through something she saw on
Mm-hmm.
TikTok. So, how do you think we can help young people deal with the threat of social media that's constantly causing this kind of anxiety with their safety?
Well, I love that question, and it's something that I am constantly thinking about myself as a mother of a teenager in this world that we're in. Um, I love the Mahatma Gandhi quote, "We must become the change that we want to see in the world." And it's one of my values. One of the things I espouse is to be the change, and that there's nothing I'm going to tell my clients, whether it's on TV or radio or in a setting like this or corporate presentation. There's nothing I will say to anyone that I'm not attempting to live myself. My belief is that I need to live it, exude it, and be the change. And so, as a parent and a mother of a teenager who has been through immense challenges because of the challenges of our external world and social media, I try to live it myself. And in so doing, as I live my values, she imbibes it. I don't sit there necessarily and give her a lecture on my top 5 values, because she's at the age where she won't necessarily want to listen to that at the age of 17. It's not very interesting. But if I can live it, and my spiritual belief is that when we live it, we exude it in our energy. It's almost like a kind of virus. We become virally infected by our values, and we exude that in our energy as we go about our day, as we go about in life, and we become the change, and we start a different type of contagion or pandemic. And so, even though I'm trained as a Western scientist, I follow a lot of Eastern principles. I was brought up in Hindu lineage. I've studied traditional Chinese medicine. There's a little bit of these principles in the book where I bring in a bit of traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, and Eastern spiritual practices. And my belief is that when we work on our own energy system and chakra system, we we exude it. We become a force for good. And I try to do that with my daughter. I've realized that less talk, less words, and more be it. And and I find that she listens to me. She then turns to me and asks questions. It's funny because ironically, 2 minutes ago she just called me. Luckily, I'm on silent, but it's probably to ask for money to get her nails done. But I don't know.
Yeah, no,
I don't know if I hope that answers your questions, because I think the young generation, it's so hard for them. There is so much disconnection as a result of hyper connection, and it's not real connection. It's a kind of fake connection, and that leaves us feeling desperately lonely and alone. And human beings need connection, and we've emerged from the pandemic thirsty for connection. I have. And I want to see people. I want to hug people. I want people to phone me. I don't just I don't just want WhatsApp messages. I want to know that my friends, my family care for me enough to phone me or hug me or to be in my physical presence. And I think the young people are really suffering. They're not getting their oxytocin hits. Their nervous system is not being soothed because there isn't enough genuine connection, and they're having to now seek it. Sherry Turkle writes a book, Alone Together, and where we talk about, is this real connection? She talks about, is this real connection or is this mere interaction? There's a whole physiological difference between sending someone a quick message on social media or actually phoning them or saying, can we meet? Can I hug you? The body responds very differently in terms of creating safety, inner safety.
definitely. I'm like, and you mentioned it was some of the practices that really sort of help bring that kind of centeredness, isn't it? And so, why do you think nature helps us to stay grounded?
Interestingly, there are more books now, and there is more research. showing that nature has a profound impact on our physiology. So thankfully, I'm not having to answer this question in the 1970s, where I would have been called a tree hugger, a hippie. But there's now a lot of research that shows that spending time in nature, being barefoot in nature, being out in forests, has a measurable effect on the nervous system. It activates the safety part of the nervous system. We produce oxytocin and serotonin, the feel good hormones. We produce melatonin, so it helps us to sleep at night. Blood pressure is lowered. Adrenaline and cortisol. I'm using my arms to depict these different parts of the nervous system. I'm unsafe, I'm safe. So, spending time in nature, putting your feet on the soil, getting into wild waters, spending time hugging stroking your pet, looking at the sky, even looking at a picture of nature can have a measurable impact on the nervous system. So that's why there are practices now like forest bathing.
Mhm.
And that's why open water swimming has become such a thing, because it's not just about exercise, although it is getting that way for a lot of people. It's about the therapeutic benefits of being in a wild environment.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, I remember you mentioning Shirin Yoku, the forest
Yes,
bathing, which
yes.
is just fantastic. I love that idea, and I've always seen pictures of the Japanese trees, like the bamboo forests to walk through, and they just look beautiful. And so I've just got to ask. So, if you had a tip for insomnia, what would you recommend? Because I have severe insomnia, and it really, really would be wonderful just to hear your amazing tidbit for this.
Okay, so it's going to be really difficult for me to give one tip, but what I would love to do is I would love to share with you the first step, if you like, of my unique sleep methodology. It's unique to my work, and it's called the five non-negotiables. So anyone who sees me, any presentation I give, I will give them the five non-negotiables. So what they are is, first of all, eat breakfast. There is science behind every one of these five things, but we won't go into detail. But number one, eat breakfast in the morning within about half an hour of rising. And in that breakfast, make sure that you include a source of protein, got good protein in there. It's eggs or Greek yogurt or nut butter or something. So eat breakfast in the morning within half an hour. Number two, don't use caffeine as a substitute for food, and ideally decrease your caffeine intake. If you have a cup of coffee or tea, eat first and then have it, and ideally no caffeine after 3 in the afternoon. Ideally no more than one or two. I mean, somebody like you who's got severe insomnia, no caffeine. Okay. Number three, aim to drink about 2 liters of water a day. About 2 liters a day of alkalized water, alkalized or ordinary filtered water or whatever, 2 liters a day. Number four, go to bed earlier, at least 4 nights a week, getting into bed around 9:30, 10 o'clock. Not, you don't have to be asleep, but you're relaxing. You're not on your electronic devices, which is number five. Get your phone out of the bedroom, not on your laptop, your tablet, whatever, or on your phone, but you're in bed, you're relaxing for half an hour, might be reading a book, doing a meditation, doing some journaling, but you're not on your electronic devices. Those five things, when you practice those for 7 to 10 days, they profoundly start to change your nervous system and your relationship with sleep. Then you can go even deeper. And that's where I start to teach people about, how to relax their relationship with control, breathing techniques, meditation techniques, visualization techniques that help to calm the nervous system. But practicing those five things first, it's
Yeah,
the
I,
first
I
step.
have to do these things. Honestly, I have to do these things. Like, honestly, I keep forgetting to do a lot of them. So, drinking enough water and making sure I don't have electronics near my bed, before I sleep. I'm totally guilty of all of this. So, and I keep having to remind myself to do it. And so, yeah, definitely, it is on my list of must do things every single day. So yes, five non-negotiables, absolutely really important. So, I was very excited to read your book because it just spoke to me on so many levels. Having literally been through exactly the same things that you were talking about, it was really quite profound to
Mm.
me. So, really huge thanks, Nerina, for writing it and joining me.
It's been an immense pleasure, Shashwati, really, and I'm looking forward to listening to the interview, the playback, and if I can ever help with the sleep. I mean, look, there's three other books, and it might be one of the ones that's dedicated specifically to sleep. You know, like Fast Asleep, Wide Awake is the second one, or the Little Book of Sleep. All of them. The first one's Tired but Wired, then Fast Asleep, Wide Awake, and then the Little Book of Sleep. One of those might have what you need in there. But I have a feeling it's you've got the right book, and it's really value yourself enough, love yourself enough to apply the five non-negotiables.
Definitely, definitely. I think you're right. It's yeah, it's sometimes you procrastinate or you find a way to just avoid, constantly avoid. And I think I am very guilty
Mm.
of constantly avoiding and making excuses for not
Mm.
doing this and not making time for things. But it is your life. It is your own life, and I think sometimes we
Yeah,
forget about ourselves in the process when we're trying to be this, that, the other, career success and things like that. And you
yeah,
forget at the end of it, you're just a human being. Um, yeah.
absolutely. Not a
Yes.
human
Yes,
doing, a human being.
100%. It's why the podcast started in the first place, which is how to be, because we are we're
Wonderful.
so all the time thinking about how to do instead of how to be. And so huge. Your book just works so well with this topic. So
Thank
thank you
you.
so much,
Thank you.
Narina.